Hello, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Let's give like another 2 minutes. Can share the agenda, I guess, while we're waiting for more folks to join.
Just gave a talk at Disposition 24, the ITAD conference. Um,
Oh,
and I forgot to mention carbon modeling, but I give the same talk for West Coast Asia tomorrow, so I'll remember that.
oh, excellent. And I do, there's a lot of um, new energy at OCP. To build things on top of embodied carbon. I think you were at that monthly meeting, right, Ari?
That was
Um,
great. Yeah.
yeah, so people wanting to do a better job with LCAs, iMasons. So, you know,
Yeah,
as we,
I'm moving from being a skeptic to being on board.
oh, say more about iMasons or just,
Yeah, I mean, just in general about having a common carbon modeling, you know, model that's open as
uh-huh.
opposed to like we use a third party for our LCAs, for example. But then when I start digging in deeper, I see imperfections, and
Yes.
it's a lot of work, but I like this approach. And when I reached out to
Yeah,
the company, they were not friendly. I think they're worried about what we're doing.
yeah. I mean, it's their revenue stream, right?
It's their whole business, right? And
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. But it seems, I mean, unless I guess we'll get to it. I look at the truth, right, as the unknowable true number, right? And then it's going to be a question of how close can you get to that truth? I have
yeah,
been meaning for a long time to draw up some pictures. I haven't gotten around to it of, what actions you would and wouldn't take if your, belief of embodied carbon is off by, you know, 400% plus or minus, right? On the
yeah,
plus
yeah,
side and
yeah,
on the minus. And then likewise draw the same thing for operational and then put the two of them together and, your exact middle spot is the unknowable truth, but you know, people might if people somehow thought embodied was free, right, they might turn over their equipment more often, right? Of course there's the cost there as well, but um versus if they see that it's actually a very large contributor, they would hopefully be incentivized to use the equipment longer, get some reuse going of, the either the whole thing or the most expensive portions, yada yada. So
and getting real data on embodied carbon is hard.
exactly, exactly. It's hard. I mean, it's hard, I would say, just, sitting inside of a company that's a manufacturer and looking at all the, you know, the guy that does it, for us, he, his uncertainty level is so high. Um, and he has quote unquote all the data, right?
Oh,
But
yeah.
there's still a lot of questions. All right, so maybe it's just the two of us and we can just sort of zoom along. So for the administrivia, right now I'm not doing anything with the GitHub thing. Um, and I just started using the same file that we have been using for the meetings, minutes and agendas. I just put 2024 at the top and I just stuck 2023 below. I would say I did meet with VJ, who along with Scott was the previous leader of this group. We actually
Yeah,
both
yeah.
live in Massachusetts, so
Oh,
we
really?
actually, yeah, we actually went out on Friday and had a lovely brunch together and really got to know each other. It was really quite fun. So he totally supports what we're doing here, but I don't ex he's been very, very busy between his primary job, which is running a data center under MIT. Um, I'm trying to remember the name of the other um, entity under MIT, but in any case, running like an HPC data center, and then also he's working a big chunk of his time on a startup focused on data centers for AI, which we know is pretty hot.
Oh, that's
A
a
lot
thing?
of, yeah, a lot of folks are trying to, because there's not enough GPU availability from NVIDIA now. So
Right.
how do you um, buy your own and then try to share it amongst, it's like infrastructure as a service, but for just base, AI is how I.
We're watching it keenly, A, because there's a lot of spending going on for GPUs, and B,
Hmm.
there is a storage story there with generative AI that will
Oh,
kick
for
in.
sure. For
Yeah.
sure. Absolutely. I completely agree with that. So anyway, it was fun. So I did, kind of talk through our, plan for the year, but you were at the meeting. So I don't know if unfortunately I thought I was sharing at the meeting and I wasn't till the end. I was hoping Shruti you would show up today so we could talk about it. But this is basically where I think we're heading, is that we'll be working on both embodied and operational. Um, I think we should, with all this simpler methodologies and grading, what we've learned, trying to get folks to share, et cetera, I think we can come up with a pretty good, um, Rev 2 of the white paper that's much simpler and also gives a pointer to our best data at this moment, and grades ourselves. So I think that will be of interest to people. I kept getting dinged all the time for not doing a software implementation. We've never gotten software resources since Scott left. So, and nobody's really sharing information. So I think maybe we could just go with a spreadsheet for starters and all would be well.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
big software
yeah,
is down the road.
yeah, I think it's way down the road at this point,
That's what I was going to say. Yeah. I
but
mean, I mean, I think our goal should just be to get people in the door, um, to start talking about embodied carbon and get people in the conversation.
mhm.
Um, and I think I can talk about it a lot on our side, and I'll talk about the warts and all. I talked to a couple of the I've talked to a couple of the SSD vendors on this who are friends of mine. We talk in a friendly way, and they aren't there yet on embodied carbon. Uh,
Oh, okay. So let's try to get quickly to what I have and we can have the discussion.
okay,
Because I found some data. I think it's going to be kind of interesting, actually.
okay,
Because another thing that happens if and so I'll put this as a second, you know, possibly examples will get manufacturers involved, right? So it might not, I would say, as Intel, we see things on the web or whatever, and we have a significant disagreement, but we don't say anything. But who knows, right? If it comes from OCP, maybe we'll get a little
well,
traction or involvement.
there's that paper from a couple of years ago, the dirty secret of SSDs,
Yes,
and it's all around embodied
yes.
carbon, but their data is lacking.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So hopefully we could do better. Um, there's still a lot of carbon between the DDR and the SSD on a typical motherboard. It's still, it's notable. Um, all right. So that's that's what was presented. SEC semiconductor. I should spell this out for people. Conductor Climate Consortium with Boston Consulting Group. They put a publication out late last year. I added it to our white paper, a link to it. It's interesting to look at, kind of what they're driving and, what they're thinking. And they do talk about how important energy is, but I don't think they really got into the finer details of, is it bundled RECs or unbundled RECs? And, is it market-based or just location-based? All of those questions where if it's not shown, people have questions. And I've definitely heard those questions loud and clear. Also, IMEC put out their calculator.
Who's sorry, who's IMEC?
All right. So right when we started, kind of like our second meeting, the question came, well, how does this work relative to IMEC? So IMEC is how can I put it? Sort of like an academic semiconductor fab. I think it's associated with a university or something.
That's
Oh,
good. That's good to hear. I mean, I always wonder about affiliations.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So there's like, if you saw Facebook did a paper where they were trying, they were going like at the architectural phase of building an SoC and using IMEC information to try to guess the embodied carbon of their
okay.
SoC. So they put out some kind of a calculator. I mean, internally, of course, the experts kind of, internally to Intel, were kind of raising the hairy eyeball. They said they're not a volume manufacturer. But again, it's something that's out there that people may use. I'll add a link to it. We can, perhaps understand it and maybe add it, an assessment, if we were to get a DDR number from IMEC, what would that look like? How would we grade that?
No, I mean, I like the marketplace of ideas approach. So
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. All right. And I assume you're um, all aware of the iMasons work stream starting tomorrow.
I believe so. Let me see if it's on my calendar. Let's see. Oh gosh, I'm triple booked. I don't see I see the I see Shruti's meeting. Look,
That I think there's two copies of it in the calendar. So if I look at just Wednesday, um,
I see
so
one from Spark, but I don't think that's it.
so it's
Um,
iMasons plus OCP carbon modeling, and it's also um, the one from Shruti. So there's two different ones. I unfortunately have another meeting that I really do need to attend that overlaps this spec power. You don't need to know what my problems are.
can you
So
forward it to me just in case?
the one from Shruti or
um, well, I see one from Shruti, but it says carbon label disclosure workstream kickoff.
I think they're all the same things,
Okay.
but if you want this one, let me just see where I got this. I think somebody sent it out or whatever. So let me forward this. Oh, hallelujah. I have you in my computer's memory. So
Yeah,
between,
I don't think that one's on my schedule right now.
I think it's the same as the one that Shruti put.
No, because 11 a.m. your time would be it could be I didn't accept it. Um, yeah, but I definitely don't have it on my calendar for tomorrow.
All right. So if I'm there, it's going to be like a drive-by, because
Oh, there we go. Thank you.
I do have a conflict, but I think that's okay. I'm
I'm 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. tomorrow, my time. So
lovely.
yeah, well, that's Europe to Asia.
Yaka, yaka. Um, oh, so I was gonna say something, but I mean, I know that there was a lot of interest in the carbon embodied in the data center facility. Um, Everything that I know is that the IT equipment so far outweighs the facility, which is not to say, ignore the facility. I think anybody who can build with, zero carbon concrete, etc., that's all goodness. Um, but I do think we really need to really understand and make trade-offs based on understanding the embodied carbon in the IT equipment itself. And somehow we'll have to, show them a chart that's our best estimate of the, percentages of the building versus the equipment. All right, so
Yeah.
let's move on to okay, yeah.
Well, I was just gonna say I totally agree. What we run into so many times is folks who are looking for they're trying to do the easy things that show up
Mm-hmm.
on a scorecard and not do the hard things that actually lead to, you know, carbon savings.
Yes.
And I love that concrete thing. I've heard of that. Um, I think it's even better if it bleeds into other areas of construction. Um,
Hmm.
but
Like,
it's if you look at it as a percentage of the carbon footprint, it's more of a news story and less of a real impact.
exactly. I
Yeah.
completely agree. So, all right. But my understanding is that iMasons wants to give some sort of a label or a grade both to the data center facility and to the equipment in it. It was interesting talking to VJ. He was just like, oh, stuff's coming and going. And, you know, he means equipment coming and going. And, you know, I've certainly in many, with surveys and stuff, people basically don't know what they even have in the data center. Um, you know, which is sort of step one of understanding your embodied carbon is to know how much of each SKU you have, right? But in any case, so let's go through the grading. This is the thing I'd really love your feedback on. All right. So unfortunately, did this in a spreadsheet that may well be difficult to read. But let's just try to walk through it since it's just the two of us. We can stop at any time, ask, lots of questions. So all I'm focused on right now is the silicon, the wafer fab and the wafer fab supply chain. Everything I've looked at, kind of for myself made rules of thumb based on reading CDP reports and looking at other things is that the silicon is like 90%. and the rest is the packaging, the daughter cards, the test, the testing of that whole product. But really I would say easily 90 or more, maybe even more than 90% is the wafer fab. So I'm kind of starting focus there. So I picked aspects of disclosure or understanding of that I think would be important. So that's what's listed here on line 2. So the first one would be, what is the source of this carbon manufacturing? And so let's just look at line 2 plus line 3. So line 3, I kind of said this would be the gold standard, right? The best we could really hope for if we were to get a number. So, so the source, if the exact manufacturer of every piece of silicon that's incorporated into this package would give their, exact information, that would, to me, would be the gold standard. Anything else that's based on databases or industry averages or what have you would be less than if you heard from the exact manufacturer. And then I just sort of put, if you were to, so this actually, this is what this would be, not applicable. So if you're able to get 100% from all the manufacturers of all the silicon in this packaged product, that would be the gold standard. Then you wouldn't care about if you're getting other rules of thumb, industry information, blah, 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 right? 100% coming from the exact manufacturers would be the best. And then if 100% of that carbon is attested or certified by some third party, that, that would add, the review of some weighting and certification by a third party. So it's not just the manufacturer. So any comments so far up through, so lines 2 and 3 and up to column E?
Let me look through this. I think I've already shared my experience with, having anything less than gold means non-participation, but so I like this, that it just says gold standard. The third party kind of needs to be defined. So what do we mean by third party? Is that because I know, like, for OCP security, they have their new SAFE program where they're actually bringing in third parties to be part of the program. And this is a program for attestation of firmware.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more open than it is today. We use third parties at Seagate,
Mm-hmm.
and I think we do a great job, and those third parties audit us and they get audited themselves, and we talk to big partners about it. But that can be, that can just be, we can just make it ambiguous, or we could make it like a trusted group of third-party auditors, or we could make it, it has to be part of this program, like the OCP SAFE program for firmware attestation. So there are many levels to that. And I'm okay. I'm okay with leaving it ambiguous for now. But people will ask, well, what does a third party mean? Because I've seen like single consultants who are consultant companies who are just a single person who go out and they basically do marketing stuff.
Yeah.
And
well,
I don't want that to be the third party.
Right. So you'll see as we go on, when we get to methods and sources shared.
Oh, there we go. Okay. Yeah.
If it's complete and in depth, or it's partial low depth, none are unknown, right? So I'll show you. I worked through a few examples to some degree. I didn't actually put the final carbon number here because I just don't want to get in that discussion yet. I want to talk about the methodology and, if we saw something that, looked like this, how would we grade it, right?
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, but I took that as a comment, so we'll remember it. Um, Scope 2 method. So, some people want location. Some people are okay market with bundled EACs. So those are energy attribute certificates, right? We talked about
Yeah.
this last time, but you weren't here.
I know about them though. Okay.
Yeah. So, I put those as the gold standard. And, a step down would be, if somebody is using all their, is using their relatively low cost hourly, annually accounting EACs, right? That's currently allowed by the greenhouse gas protocol, but all that probably will be different next year. So
Yeah,
to
we're
me, this,
watching we're watching
yeah,
that closely, and
everyone is.
what's funny is even though our LCAs are, I think, based on the higher target,
Uh,
my internal guys, they won't let me use those EX. So
yeah,
so so I have to assume that everything, even though we're technically 100% renewable energy,
yeah,
I have to use mixed
exactly,
for marketing. Because
exactly.
yeah, so it's like, I mean, we're very conservative. I understand this really well. I wish I was in. Actually, no, you didn't need me for that discussion. You got it. So thank you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Intel now says we're like 93% renewable energy, but the majority of that is unbundled racks. So, Intel might give me some pushback on that, but for me talking to dozen plus people, I do think the gold standard would be for, saying you're wanting to feed into an LCA or, some other place where you're, trying to account for embodied carbon location or if you put your, bundled EACs in as well, that kind of seems like something that will not be disputed, right? So call that
Yeah,
the gold standard.
and I'm probably a little closer to marketing than you are. I'm kind of the buffer between marketing and our engineering manufacturing folks.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. So, and then tier one supply chain, I think the gold standard would be that for every piece of silicon, if that manufacturer, worked on their supply chain and used that information to source their tier one supply chain, that would be probably the best you could do. Um, and then, so 100%, let's say.
That's hard. That's
I
hard.
know nobody does it, so nobody's going to hit the gold standard, and that's kind of
Yeah.
known. But they'll be great, all those gray areas, right?
It's a
In between.
motivation. I mean, we
Exactly.
every year we do better and better, and
Ex
I think we got an early start, so we like this game, but it's hard.
yeah. And so then I said for tier two and beyond, even tier three, you know, is this somehow sourced from the exact supply chain or somehow modeled and covers 75%? So again, super aggressive, I think beyond what anybody does today. But
Yeah, you're
that would
getting,
be.
the paper from our consultant that I can't share.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I what I can say is you're getting really close to the methodology. Um, I'd say you're pretty strict, but that's fine. That's where we should be.
Well, again, right? This is the gold A plus, the gold standard,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
We
yeah.
don't expect anybody to get this, or we want to leave room to grow as, hopefully things more is disclosed with greater precision. We want to leave room to grow closer and closer to this A plus, but would we ever get that? So then we talked about, methods and sources. Transportation, personally, I don't think it's very interesting. It's so small relative to all the manufacturing. But it has come up more than once, so I did put a column for it.
There are certain times a year when there's a lot of air transport
Mm,
for some components. So I guess it's worth leaving there. But again, 100% is really tough.
exactly. And it's not it like I said, it's so small, relatively speaking, you know. We could even discuss, do we want to include column K or not? I would not be upset if we included it. And then timeliness, if it's the current year or it's, we can
Oh
talk
yeah.
about, is it
Yeah.
5 years, 10 years? And all of these, could wind down to none or unknown, right? And
Yeah,
you know,
I'd say 10 years is like the dinosaur age because things are moving so fast for the past 10 years.
yeah,
Maybe
so
5. Thank
I'm
you.
fine with
Yeah.
that. I'm totally fine with that. And then so I left myself a column for, all right, so you got the overview idea
Yeah.
here is that, we have all of these aspects from B to L that are part of the grading, and for each one there'll be a gradation from the gold standard to, other possible less precise, but still possibly useful. So then I went through and I actually only got through 3 examples. Um, so the examples I did was DDR4, so that's 32 gigabyte DIMM. That's, I would say, the majority of what's running today. Your bleeding edge has DDR5, and your super legacy would have DDR3, but kind of the sweet spot for the market today would be DDR4. So that's what I started from. It turns out SK Hynix has a lot of data or some interesting data, so I just used them as my starting point. So I said, okay, let's do a DDR4 from SK Hynix, and then let's try to do the same from Micron. So what I came to from Micron is that it's just from what I was able to find publicly from Micron, and I looked at their CSR reports and CDP reports, and um, my assessment is that we would get a better number from Micron if we basically used the SK Hynix numbers and just graded it lower because it comes from the broader industry rather than the company itself. So let's talk through SK Hynix. So what I said is, let's see if there's some way we can. So for the percent of the full product silicon carbon that is covered versus the percent that's not. So I said 95% is covered, 5% is not. So what's my data for that? So if you look at this picture here, this is one side of a DIMM. I am not sure if you flip it over that you would see exactly the same thing or basically empty. That's something I still need to figure out. But you can see that basically it's the same packaged part over and over
Yeah.
again, except for this RCD, which is little ASEC. They are that its most important job is to actually these are called RDIMMs. It's to register the address that came across and then register the data as it's being sent back. So giving a pipeline stage effectively. But you can see that the majority, even if the other side is a duplicate, by far the majority comes from SK Hynix. So that's why I said 95%. would be based on what, data from the manufacturer, and only 5% is, again, of the silicon is kind of a question mark. So I got the 95 and the 5. Third party attested. So SK Hynix does go out to this third party. So I tried to put all these points here. So they go to this thing called Korean Environmental Industry and Technology Institute, which gives a certification. So they got a certification for an 8 gigabit DDR4 DRAM. So I assume this is only the silicon. Assume it includes the supply chain, because I read from this Korean Institute and they said that they do cradle to gate kind of analysis. Yeah.
So you said cradle to grave?
I think that I don't think they include product in use and
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
disposal, or I don't think that that's included. I think it's
Yeah.
just like cradle to gate. I
Okay.
definitely,
Okay.
so I assume that includes some transportation, goes back to some degree, all the way to tier
Yeah.
2 supply chain. The certification was in 2019. And so I'm assuming that it's still valid, that, probably production yield has improved a little bit. Supply chain has rejiggered a little bit, but for, within the error bounds of what you would find in this kind of analysis, I think it's good enough. So I just kind of did a little bit of screenshotting from their CSR reports, probably hard to read, but they do give nicely a water footprint as well as a carbon footprint.
Okay. Those numbers are, I mean, I don't have other data in front of me, but they seem in line.
Mm-hmm. So this is for, again, if you look at the picture, there's, the little
Mhm.
DDR that's over and over again. It's for one of those.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
So it has to be multiplied out.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I was
and,
looking at the 8 gigabyte, 6 gigabyte. So yeah, I understand.
well, these are gigabit.
Oh, sorry, gigabit. Sorry, gigabit. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm.
Um,
Boy,
so yeah.
I'd really have to go do some math, but then it seems even more in line. Um,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, right. I'm not in the memory business, but it definitely passes the sniff test for me. Now, maybe somebody could do an expose and say this Korean thing is, you bribe them and they say yes or whatever. But, for now, I just sort of would be like, okay, you know, when I filled all this out, I gave all this information of sources. I gave these pictures. I have to add the links of where to find these pictures in the CSR reports, etc. And then the one thing we haven't talked about yet is the CDP reports from the 2019 timeframe. Only show a single-digit % difference between location and market. It's likely unbundled EX, but I'm just assuming it,
yeah. I
whatever they fed into this certification is very close to 100% location scope too.
Yeah, I would try to focus on the 90%, not the
Exactly.
10%. So I agree. Yeah.
Exactly. So just kind of going through, so this level of disclosure that I've shown you, and then for each spot in the spreadsheet, I kind of, filled it out, except for I didn't get around to
Yeah.
tier 2 or transportation. So based on that, I would kind of want our grade to be in the area of a B plus. I think this is pretty good. It's not the gold standard, but I think it's pretty good.
Yeah, again, back to the grading. I'll have to. It's been years, but years ago, I used to look. I used to work a little bit with Energy Star. This is
Ah,
when I was at Microsoft, and they've faced this problem. And I know back then, like for appliances, they would like the first year for an Energy Star cycle, only a certain percentage of the best performing appliances would get an Energy Star logo. And it was just a logo.
mm,
It wasn't
mm-hmm,
A or B or C or D. It was just you get the logo or not. But by the end of their cycle, um, they would try and get close to 100%. And that
mm,
was their way of motivating the market to move forward.
interesting.
So that's just a thought, because we want, I like the grading system, but it will deter participation. But if it's something like an Energy Star logo, um, and maybe they don't get there in year one, but they get there in year two or year three. Um, that's a thought. It's just an idea.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, the other thing I would say is that this was totally me looking at this data and saying, yeah, it's not the gold standard, but it's pretty good. So I'd want it to have a good grade. But I didn't use an algorithm. This is most, just me kind of like looking at it. So I don't think we're at the final point on the grade, but let's just for completeness sake, look at the next line, which would be same part, but from Micron, who I just couldn't get much data from what they publish. Um, so we can just kind of look at, oh, I didn't even write anything. My bad. Um, so, but basically what I said was in the vacuum of Micron not showing anything, um, we could use the SK Hynix number as a good approximation. Um, but then I did rejigger the numbers a little bit. I thought I put some stuff here, but I don't know. I don't know. But so so what I didn't do a good job of this, so we'll have to come back. But sort of what I said is, I'd give that a C plus, where you know it's based on reviewed industry data. It's mostly manufactured in the same part of the world. And so, we could basically give essentially the same number, but just kind of say that, we have more uncertainty. Maybe rather than a grade, this could be an uncertainty. Let me give myself that comment.
Yeah, I like to get it as far away from grades as we can.
Yep. Okay. All right. I'll see in my next round. I'll try to do that. So, and then the last one is also from SK Hynix. This would be a SSD. Um, so I'm just guessing that somebody, on their motherboard has a terabyte. Um, so if you look at the SSD picture relative to the DRAM picture, they do show both sides. Um, and you can see over at the right, there's 4 memory chips that are um, stamped SK Hynix, at least in the picture. And then over to the left, there's 2 other things that I'm assuming are ASICs. Um, the bottom one, I'm assuming would be a controller, and the back side, I'm assuming would be some kind of a cache or something. Total guess. Um, there's other notable pieces here that we don't know what they are, but if you just look at the footprint of them, they're relatively small.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I did an exercise once at Microsoft where we took a high definition picture of a sock, and
Mm.
and we were and we give it to teams and they had to identify every part.
Mm-hmm.
And it's relatively easy not only to identify the part but to find the current costing. Um, and I forgot how to do it, but I'm sure I could refine it. It's, a lot of stuff's out of Shenzhen or other places where there's a marketplace. Um,
Mm.
so yeah,
Interesting.
if we could actually get a card, um, it's just an
Yeah.
way. Yeah.
I mean, that's one way to do it. I think another way to do it would be this M.2, we would know the X and Y of this. That can be found. Um, and so then you can, kind of eyeball it and get yourself an X and Y for the A6. As it's less important for the memories. Um, in this example because we have numbers for the memories that are based on gigabits. So you just kind of need to multiply it out to your amount. But I think we could get X and Y um, for the A6, and then we could do some rule of thumb X versus Y and year at TSMC. I think we could get it included eventually with some reasonable estimate. Again, not what I would call an A plus, but good enough.
Yeah, I was thinking more in terms of who to talk to, how to motivate the industry, and it's a longer term idea. It, I just started thinking about it when we pulled up the picture.
Yeah,
No,
yeah.
yeah, no, we aren't going to be private investigators. That's not our job.
No, and we're not going to spend a lot of money to
Yeah,
buy parts and tear them down, right? That's not going to happen. So, I did. So in the public disclosure, I talked about a lot of what we already talked about. So I just said to assume 30% of the carbon contribution from the A6, assume it is manufactured in Asia Pacific region, probably at TSMC. So SK Hynix also has gotten certification on a 256 gigabit, something that they call 3D V4 TLC NAND. So if you look at the M2, now we actually don't even know that the M2 is the form factor that was used. Um, but most people aren't gonna, whatever, perhaps know the form factor. They
yeah.
they quite likely just know the amount. But in any case, they did get, if you look on the right, for 3D V4, that's what got certified. And then if you look over here, it's 4D V7 and V6 that are these particular parts. These are what I would call the rulers or whatever. So it might be a slight mismatch. But again, it's 2020 certified data. So I just sort of, as part of the disclosure, I just kind of, talked about it. So we just kind of judged it down. I picked 15%. But that is certainly something one could do better on. And so and then I made a lot of assumptions similar to I did for DDR. Um, for the rest of it, I just copied it here. So you can see that whereas for DDR, we kind of felt like, oh, we've got good manufacturer data for 95%. Now it's more in the 70%. That's good, manufacturer data. The third party certification rather than for 95% of the chips, maybe it's down in 60%, etc. So, I would sort of put I would want this to be graded or what was the other term we used? I would want its uncertainty to be more than for the DDR. Let's just put it that way. So that's sort of, that gives you you know, a kind of a view of what I've been working through. And so I didn't finish it yet, but Micron also has NAND SSDs. They don't share any information. So, would just model it off of the SK Hynix, but would give a higher uncertainty number on it.
Hey, Deb and Ari, this is Francis. I joined in super late, so I apologize. I'm just kind of listening in. What I guess, so, and once again, I apologize because I'm jumping in, but I guess, what is your vision for who would be doing this modeling or, doing this grading? Like, who would be SK Hynix is close to Micron?
So, I mean, you are in a fortunate position to work for a large buyer. So you would have a direct relationship with whoever you're buying from, right? So anything you would get would go way beyond this, right? You would be able to squeeze and, ask for more and more information, blah, blah, blah. So, you would be, so you kind of miss, we were talking about, when you talk about the grade or the uncertainty, you would be closer approaching what we would be calling the gold standard or the lowest uncertainty, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this would more be it. So kind of since we last talked, Francis, we've made some efforts to get folks to disclose. Haven't had much success. And so we decided, okay, what we were asking for was too much previously. So, we're going to roll back the level of detail we're asking for, but we're going to focus on the most important things. So that's sort of what row 2 is. And so what I am proposing is that we would simplify up our white paper to explain the methodology. And then we would put this out there to say, as of today, this is the best we could do based on 100% public information. So there's nothing here. It's based on special relationships or, non-disclosure agreements or any of that. And then really key would be in this column M would be, we would disclose how we came to these numbers. And then we would put, I think we decided today, rather than a grade, we'd probably put an uncertainty, very high, high, medium, low, very low uncertainty, something like that maybe. And so our hope would be to incentivize people to do better, but also to allow other people that don't have the, buying strength of Meta to have a, to have a number, and to also kind of have a sense of how that number came to be, what's the uncertainty around that number, but then they could, do the, take the best they can get now, do what they need to do. Because what's happening now is people are using just kind of whatever's available on the web. So this would be a better, or they pay a lot of money for a consultant to, does this or something even more janky.
I will say that so that there is one enforcing method, and that is if they publish an LCA that includes embodied carbon, they have to be able to defend that with other, like the EU, California, other entities. So that forces them to be fairly honest, even if they're using a third-party consultant like we do, to audit themselves. It has to be defensible. So that might be, maybe that's not gold, but we talked about the Energy Star example where
Mhm.
you know you basically have two categories. You have Energy Star, you get the label, and it goes through a 5-year cycle or something like that, where eventually everybody gets the label, but the first year it's only 10 or 20%, something like that. And then people don't have to worry about that's for the elite few, but as long as they're participating, that's good enough. And we want to incent them to get to Energy Star.
Mhm.
So that's one idea we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
But
Go
just
ahead.
having an LCA, yeah.
No, but I don't mean to interrupt.
Well, I just
Oh.
said, just I can't find LCAs for so many products out there. And when I do find them, they're often pretty scant.
Yeah.
Well,
And
and I
yeah,
would say when I talk to consultants, I'm often spend so much of the time educating them on, trying to help them improve what they're doing. I just, yeah. I mean, even though they're going to say this is, it's the best they could do with what they knew, but like they'll point back at Paya, which is
Yeah.
over a decade old, or they'll point at
Yeah.
Gabby. And when you talk to the Gabby people, they don't know much, etc. So, their LCA will point to these other things and, they'll give themselves the stamp of approval based on, well, I showed my work, right? But it's all based on a somewhat shaky foundation. So,
that's a good point.
so this would be something that somebody, I'm just hoping to move the industry forward. I don't think we're
Yeah.
gonna, right? And to give people that, don't have that one-on-one relationship with Intel, with a DDR manufacturer, et cetera, give them a reasonable estimate of embodied carbon. So, and hopefully we'll just do better and better over time.
Yeah. So can I ask a clarifying question about that?
Yeah.
Is your goal for people who do not have a direct relationship? And so I'm thinking either like way upstream or downstream or academics, nonprofit, like not procurers of this gear, or is it people who don't have the purchasing power of, say a hyperscale, who aren't in their top 10 customers?
Exactly.
Is there one or the other group that you're thinking of here
I,
primarily?
I think either one could use it as a starting point, right?
Yeah.
Right. And again, again, so what's so important would be to have this methods, assumptions, and sources, right? So not just include the pictures, but the links and, just so that people would, now you just get an LCA, it's got a number, you don't know,
Yeah.
or maybe it will refer to Paya, but that's kind of it, right?
Yeah.
So it's just, again, it's
Yeah.
like, it's just to kind of move things forward, a little bit more transparency, a little bit more clarity, you
Eh,
know.
But I would
Yeah.
say target the big fish.
Yeah. So one, and I don't, one food for thought,
Mm-hmm.
um, is I think there's a couple of theories of change you can follow in this space.
Mm.
One of my kind of go-to ways to try to influence this space is if we as an industry can align the request, thus simplify for, the manufacturers or suppliers of any of these given products, kind of what they need to produce to share. It then makes it a lot easier for them. Like if it's already a document they have, they could either choose to make it publicly available or they could choose to easily share it with any customer, who wants that, whether or not they're a big customer or not, like lower that burden of entry and thus it's easier to share. Wouldn't guarantee they'd make things public, but might lower those like, hey, they're their like 100th customer and not their top 5. One
I
one
want
way
to
I've
capture
seen
this.
success in the OCP space was putting in the requirement to complete a life cycle assessment and share with your customers, so we weren't requiring them to make it public, but share with your customers in the SSD and the HDD specifications, the OCP specifications. And after that got included in probably late 2022 or early 2023, I at least have had vendors reach out with internally calculated, but still high quality data that they had never shared that level, that type of data with us previously. And so, and I share that as an example of, I might encourage us to step back and think through, where can we use OCP's scalable and able to be reproduced strengths, and how can we make the first step in this journey pretty simple? And I like the grading, or I like introducing, like, here's a couple of tiers you could target, but what could we pull on that wouldn't make the three of us the source of truth? Because I also want to make sure, like, just what you were saying, like, his consultants kind of hide their numbers and just point to these other data points. Like, I don't want to just be that smoke screen, like another like, oh, well, OCP said that it was this. Like, okay, well, yeah, OCP pie, like, we just become another layer kind of false certainty to people who, like, to me, the source of truth for this data should be the manufacturers.
That's a great idea, because being on the other side of those specs, they have a lot of influence.
Yeah, and also, like, I don't think Meta should be the source of truth for what an HDD's carbon emissions is. Like, there's other people who, cough, cough, Ari, who know that better than I do. And I think what I saw really successful with that SSD and HDD spec was, like, pretty simple. We included 2 sustainability requirements. It seems to have driven some change in the industry.
What were the 2 requirements?
Life cycle assessment, and then report on recycled content by material, I believe.
I think it could have been more expansive, the sustainability section.
Definitely could have been, but it was like, it was the first time there was a sustainability section, so that's where kind of the, like, get it in there, and then we expand in the future. And Ari, like, I'd love your thoughts on it, but for me, at least, I think that might be a good approach for us to take here of, let's not try to make this perfect. Like, can we make this simple as everyone goes from, like, 0 to 10? And then we can have our roadmap for getting people up to 100 over the next couple of years. But, like, I'm almost thinking, like, could the grading just be as easy as, an ISO peer-reviewed LCA conducted on that specific product, versus on that product family, versus a internal analysis that hasn't yet gone through, the full ISO alignment. Maybe that's, then broken out into for that specific product or for, that product family. And maybe those are just kind of a,
are you talking about
classifications?
Are you talking about for the OCP marketplace?
For the OCP marketplace, but also for products that aren't on that marketplace. Like, making those up, but if those were the 4 categories, kind of a, here's the good, better, best, worse, and make it clear to companies, like, you want to try to move up this ranking.
Yeah,
you're starting from scratch, an internal asset like that. I'd rather have that than nothing.
Yeah, no, you hit on it. What's in the sustainability spec or section for HDDs is, for us, it was like, we did that years ago, but the influence of those specifications cannot be understated. on not just HDDs but SSD manufacturers as well.
Yeah.
So I'll
And
somebody will get
y'all
angry at me
are,
for saying this, but that's true.
well, and y'all are always whenever I talk about like commodities maturities within this space, y'all are always the example of very mature, high sustainability disclosures, etc. There's a lot of a lot of component manufacturers or commodities within this space that didn't get there years ago.
Do you think we have any into TSMC?
Would you repeat that?
Oh, do you think that there's any way to have influence or get more data from TSMC?
So
Or go ahead, Deb.
TSMC has filed with CDP and they have a CSR report. So we can at a high level, kind of cross-sectioning between that, what IMEC says, reasonable guesswork, we could come up with rule of thumb. I believe.
Yeah. At least from my view, I think when we get I think if we can consolidate messaging and requests and unify on that as an industry would help them help us. And I say that like I don't have, this is not based on like, I don't have contacts at TSMC, etc., but just like given.
So we did put a link to the Semiconductor Climate Consortium. It came out, I don't know, probably about 3 months ago, Francis. So it's in the minutes. I'm just looking to see, how would I know if TSMC participated here? I would have to ask. It does not look like they are on the yeah, this list of, but they could very well be contributing. And that, at least if they are, and if we read through that position paper, at least we'll know what that body is thinking.
It just dawned at me that they're such a big player in our industry, and I don't see them.
They absolutely are. That's why I'm saying, we could triangulate. But Francis is saying the opposite. Don't, I was of the thought, if we put out, here's our best information, please work with us to improve this, and etc., and see what happens. So I'm just wondering.
Yeah.
And
I appreciate, I like that approach, but
oh, so they are a founding member of this consortium. You might wonder how active they are.
Yeah.
Based on they're not on the governing board. But if you just look at if you look at the report that I linked coming from this, industry consortium that's supposedly going to solve, right? They're not going to give us embodied numbers anytime soon. They're more talking about how we're going to get more renewable energy for ourselves, for our supply chain. That's the most important thing, etc. But yeah, go ahead.
I think we need, if we can make it easy, try to streamline what the expectation is so that they're hearing it from multiple places. But I'm also just, given that some of these players aren't engaging even in industry consortium groups, it appears, I don't really think
like
that
who,
they would. I don't think
who,
they'd engage in improving this sort of data in a public forum.
so I won't write this down, but is there like one or two that you would want to call out?
No,
Has not
not
engaged.
calling, but like, what you were just saying is like if what I was saying, if TSMC wasn't at least an author on that document, I don't know if OCP in a public forum could encourage them to improve low quality data. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. I don't think they're engaged at Paya either. Um, but again, they have published to CDP, CSR reports. I do think, between that and IMEC, we probably could triangulate to get some rules of thumb out there, and then we'll see what happens. I have seen
Yeah.
information that they give to customers because ironically, Intel is a TSMC customer. So I've kind of seen the quality of what they give, but it's not clear at all what their methodology is. Um,
Yeah.
a bit of a
Yeah.
head scratcher.
One reason I brought it up is I know in Taiwan the renewable energy percentage is single digits.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah,
Ex-
but I guess I go back to I think let's be very careful in the world of intense scrutiny about environmental marketing claims.
mm,
If we as an OCP community group, even with all the, caveats and documentation, et cetera, like could we come out and say that, you know, based on, that we think this is, this component is why embedded carbon. Like, I'm just not, I don't know if that's the place we should be. I don't know if that's the right role for the OCP community, because then it's also like, how do we maintain that? How often do we update it? How do we add new component? Like we become a database manager instead
yes.
of, which I
No,
just
we want to be an influencer. We want to motivate change, and there are others. California has new legislation, and in the EU, of course, on that are imposing penalties for greenwashing.
Yeah. And so I
Something
think this is where, I'd encourage us to think through what OCP's core strengths are. And I think one of those is bringing the industry together to be able to collaborate on specific products and features, etc., and figure out how we can leverage that instead of, creating another Paya tool, or creating, something that, Deb, as you were pointing out, like if we make it and it's not maintained well, it can just kind of fall into oblivion.
Hmm.
Yeah, we have to look at ROI for
Well, I mean, we do have to be careful because in general, like for example, TSMC I've never seen them at OCP, right? Um, SK Hynix is a member, but I don't see them a whole lot. So at
Yeah,
least
but like if
in
I also
sustainability.
don't know if OCP directly or indirectly would want to like call out TSM. Like I don't think that's they're not an advocacy like provocative group in that manner.
No, I think how it works is let's use the storage specs as an example. Is that a requirement comes out and it forces companies to go and then talk to their suppliers, and eventually on the back end that influences people like TSMC. So you create your own weather. But we don't. I agree. It's not something I didn't mean when I brought up TSMC. I didn't mean to like engage them or coerce them directly. I just meant to like think of them as one of the end goals. And you could say the same thing about Samsung.
Mm. Well, you might say then the whole, so Intel struggled where the carbon marketing, where to engage with carbon modeling, sorry. not marketing. And decided OCP was a good place. You guys are just sort of saying, nah, that's, OCP really isn't the place for this, is kind of what I'm hearing, you know.
Well, I guess my perspective is I don't think OCP should be the modeler. I think OCP should encourage all of the players in this space to model their data, model using their primary data and start sharing it in an open fashion, at least within business relationships, and ideally, fully, publicly.
Um,
Like,
yeah,
that would be my because once again, like OCP doesn't have a modeling, like a team of LCA modelers who will maintain like.
but
So I
that
think
is
in
that
being
I
the
think
modeler, I don't know how we do that as an OCP community.
I think that was what was the purpose of this group. I mean, initially we were asking for lots of specific information from the vendors, right? We had this whole taxonomy, and we were asking, give me
Yeah.
your location and your market based for this, for every one of your chiplets, and give me this and this, right? And there was no way that was going to happen, right? So I guess the tension here is that, on one hand, we could just, hope that if we write a spec that says, you all have to publish your numbers and be more transparent, and and it's OCP is requirement, so that's one path we could take. The other path I had come to is show an example of what this would look like, right? Using publicly available data. We don't necessarily, with the hope that that would, if folks say, oh, wow, that's really, that's not good enough data. I'm going to, I'll disclose better data. I'll be more transparent. That would be good, right? More people would have access to more transparent data versus just the biggest customers. So that's sort of two different approaches, I guess we could
Yeah, I
take.
mean, I started on the side of Francis, and I've come around a little bit just because I've seen that there could be better data modeling out there that would even influence like the third party we hire to do our LCA reporting. I don't think we're going to create software or do a ton of work, but I think we can come up with something better that's a model. So maybe I'm falling in between the two approaches.
Interesting. Interesting.
Yeah. Ari, well, so I think my other question on that is if we start trying to build our own model, most of the models I've seen, or some we've built internally, are based off of, life cycle assessment databases, IMAC, like they're based
Yep.
off these.
And certain assumptions when you get to tier 2, I've seen it myself. Yeah.
Certainly assumptions, and certainly these other kind of databases or data sources.
Yeah.
And so the other thing I just flag is we'd need to think through, could we build a model and share it publicly based on, pay for play, for lack of a better terminology, databases. Like I don't think I could, take the Gabby Electronics database and build a simple model and then share that out publicly, because
Right.
that's their business,
Exactly.
you need to pay for access to that database, so you can't, like, all of the users are contractually obligated not to just go open source their database.
Exactly.
And I can't share what I have.
Yeah, but but I'm
this
sure
is what
I'm sure you have
happens
a contract
again.
in place for your data sets.
I would just say this is what happens again and again. Is that you know, the everyday person, right? The person that wants to account for their annual embodied carbon of their IT equipment across their 5 relative, you know, non-hyperscale size data centers, right? They have like nothing, and they're not, you know, they're not going to invest in accessing databases or
Mhm.
you know, so if instead it's, you know, so what people tend to do now is that Dell publishes all those LCAs, right? They just go there or
Yeah.
something. And so I think this would be a step up from that, um, and possibly would, you know, help to move things forward.
Yeah. I guess, but this brings back to my theory of change does not
Yeah.
cover like, you know, nonprofit groups interested in this space. But
Yes.
for the smaller scale customer, and all right, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, you know, from the supplier perspective. But my thought is, if we can standardize the request, and these whatever the supplier is already meeting that and you know, calculating that data for that product or that product family for their largest customers. You know, in reality, the large customers are the drivers of the action. But if that data sheet already exists for that product, it could be shared with the person who's purchasing 20 racks. You know, like
I would say
wouldn't need it
Intel,
directly, you know, directly, but
so Intel, right? You know, right now there is this horrific fear of sharing, right? Basically, I would describe it, right? So they're only going to share under NDA, my assessment, right? And only to the top customers, right? So I'll just put that there, right? And I've asked multiple times over, you know, on multiple avenues, is, you know, can't we? And it's always like, no, no, no. All doors are closed. So, you know, if I, for Intel, share something based on publicly available data, um, and show all my work, right? Maybe that will incentivize Intel to do a better job, not just to our tier 1 customers, but just in general. Um, More importantly is DDR, I think. It's a much bigger percentage of the footprint. Um, and, um, you know, we have one vendor that's done a really good job of, of sharing that, right? But to the layperson, translating what's shared by that vendor to their final product and understanding what is and isn't disclosed there is very hard. Whereas I think we could kind of make that more transparent, right? Make the movement from you know, kind of not knowing to here's a reasonable number and why, you know, make that more transparent. And then hopefully over time that would incentivize, you know, if Micron doesn't like that everybody's using SK Hynix to guess their Micron embodied carbon, maybe Micron would disclose something similar to what SK Hynix does, although so far they haven't. So that's just me thinking out loud. I guess, you know, my quote unquote theory of change is based on what I see from the inside of one vendor. And also looking at the plethora of information that is publicly available right now that could give everybody better numbers. And, you know, if we decide OCP is not the place to, you know, work on this, then, you know, maybe there's someplace else.
I mean, OCP is a huge influencer. Largely because of the hyperscalers,
Mm,
and that influences the entire storage community.
mm.
So I would,
Yeah, but this
I would
this
think of it that way.
is a chicken and egg, right? The hyperscalers are going to get reasonable numbers because they have the strength and
Oh, I
the
see what you're
dollar,
saying.
right? So, although I've stopped doing it, but I was in multiple disclosures to hyperscalers from Intel, and uh, I didn't, whatever.
Yeah.
It was not as clean
Well,
as one would have hoped. Let's put
yeah.
it that way.
But
And and
Ari, I think
hyperscalers had their consultants who frequently were obsessing on the wrong things, right? So again, there had to be a lot of education. Why are you obsessing so much on the heat sink? That's not where the most of the carbon is, or you know, other things were just kind of weird, right?
Yeah. And,
yeah.
and that, I think
Well,
that's why it's important that we have a model. But sorry, I go ahead.
no, finish that thought, and then I'll chime in on related.
Oh, we can influence the hyperscalers such that they are not relying on goofy consultants, and we can also encourage more openness, which at least to lip service the hyperscalers will support. So I do think, yes, they can get their data, whether it's good data or bad data. I think we can influence that, and we create our own weather, and that's certainly what the storage specs have done.
Mm.
Yeah. And I think to that point, and I don't want the sustainability track with an OCP to take this the wrong way, but I think OCP is a major influencer in the industry, but not every work product coming out of OCP has the same level of influence.
Yes.
And so I think that's where, once again, thinking about where OCP's core strengths are and like the specifications, from my somewhat outside, but like that seems to be a core strength that really influences the whole industry and influences products both on the OCP marketplace and beyond the OCP marketplace.
Yeah.
A provocative presentation at the regional summit on this, I don't know if that's going to change, any of these component manufacturers, public disclosure perspectives, if like, the sustainability track to a room of 50 people, said that someone's data is better than someone else's.
Yeah.
So like I just think like let's try to think through where we actually get OCP's strength pulling in our direction instead of assuming like, I don't know how many people, a white paper written by the OCP sustainability group. Once again, I don't think that's going to change, I feel like at this point, companies who aren't like, no one's like, oh man, I never thought about disclosing my environmental impact. It's like these companies have very well-informed reasons for why they are doing it. Whether I agree with their reasoning or not is its own debate. But like, we need to figure out the way to communicate it in a novel way, because just sustainability people wanting better data, they've heard that before and they've chosen not to have that message resonate with changing their strategy.
Well, we are sorry. We are seeing it come down from the boardroom level and from senior management. It's kind of a pincer movement. It's the way I see it. Yeah, I talked with one major customer who's been very uncooperative. Let's put it that way. And then our execs talked with their execs and got a completely opposite message. And then that comes down. So there are interesting ways to influence. One thing I found that was effective was, honestly, the sustainability talks are a good starting place. But I went cross group and presented to the security group, and that got a reaction. It got a very, very let's say a lot of discussion, and mostly a positive reaction. And what wasn't positive was still constructive.
Mhm.
So, in the sustainability group, I feel like we're all singing to the choir. So we do need to think about reaching out cross group.
So I understand the overlap with security for your set of products, but what, for a more general list of products, what would we overlap with?
Systems, storage. I'd have to look at the list of tracks, but we really need to get sustainability out of that room. And we have great messages that can impact a larger audience.
Yeah. And both of you, apologies. I need to bail off. I know I joined
Yeah.
and it threw some wrenches into the conversation.
Oh, this is the kind of discussion we need to have for sure.
Yeah.
And I tried to capture a lot of what you both were saying.
No,
So
thank you for that.
Mhm.
So yeah, those, but I think it's just useful overall. Like, let's think through, long-term ability to maintain, whatever we're doing and put out there. And then really just what are OCP's strengths and how do we get to leverage those for the, agenda we all have, which is, fighting climate change, for example. But how can we leverage OCP instead of, get it outside of that sustainability room?
Mhm. Yeah, I'll just throw out getting everybody to sign up for science-based targets is the biggest, I would say, the biggest lever. If OCP made that a requirement somehow, that would be really good.
Yeah, like fully agree, but I think that's where I don't know if OCP, since it's so product focused, do they make company level requirements on participating companies? I don't know if that fits within the OCP approach to influencing the industry.
Mm.
We could push for a sustainability section in every OCP spec.
I think that already is a
I
requirement.
think it is a requirement, actually. Yeah.
So, okay.
But the ones I've seen are pretty scant.
Of course, because we're not telling them.
Thank you both. I gotta bail. Bye.
Yeah, this was great. I got a bail too.
Thanks for jumping on. I got to too.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Right, bye.